It's a cross between bass players.
Yeah.
The older one and the younger one, the bald and and the hairy. I've read something about your biography. Then we began at the same age playing, probably 10 or 15 years difference. And because I began at 17.
Oh wow!
And you
Yeah,
too.
very late.
Yeah. We began late. What did you push towards the bass?
Well, I actually didn't choose to play bass. I was a guitar player when I was a kid, and then when I was 17, I was playing guitar in my high school's jazz band, you know, and they had 3 guitar players and no bass player. So I think this is how a lot of bass players start. Is there's just there's no bass player. So my teacher handed me a bass, and I became a bass player.
Because in my case, there was this attraction when I was a kid to bass frequencies, listening to the Police records, Sting and Bob Marley and Iron Maiden, to all this different music, but with strong interest in, and so I was thinking about you and trying to ask you if there was any kind of bass hero.
Yeah, I think John Paul Jones. From Led Zeppelin, and I was really into Paul McCartney and Sting. Yeah. You know, I grew up listening to my dad's music, and my dad really loved classic rock. So that was the kind of stuff that I was into. But I also, even at that age, I was listening to Stevie Wonder and James Brown. So Bootsy Collins was kind of like my guy, my hero.
With the star glasses.
The star glasses.
How do you move in producing Snarky Puppy first and composing for Snarky Puppy, and then how do you move when you produce a mainstream pop record?
I don't really see any difference. I mean, and I don't really see any difference between playing bass and being a producer either. You know, I mean, I think about, I mean, being a producer, being a good producer is just knowing how music is supposed to sound, right? And bringing out the important parts of the important moments. And so for me, even when we play tonight, I feel like everyone on the stage is thinking like a producer. You know, there might be a trumpet player, might be a keyboardist, might be me playing bass, but we're all kind of thinking like producers. We're not just thinking, this is my bass part. We're thinking, what does the music need in this moment, and how can I help that? You know, so for me, production is like a state of mind.
You play really connected to your instrument. Do you practice a lot, or did you practice a lot?
Yeah. These days, I don't practice much because my time is being spent doing other things. But there was a period of time when I was in college, so from 18 to 22 years old, where I was practicing bass like 8 to 10 hours every day, you know, for 4 years. And now that I don't have time to practice, I really rely on the work that I did way back then to kind of allow me to do the things that I want to do. And
I think many young players rely too much on technique and not so much on listening to records and trying to play.
Well, there's an old joke about like, you know, the less notes that you play, the more money you get paid per note, you know, which I think is a really funny thing. I think it's more about, if I had to speak to a young musician and give them advice, I would say, you know, that technique, being able to play your instrument, is like the first step in being a good bass player or being a good musician. The next step is making decisions, you know, musical decisions. And so I would say, you know, to young musicians, as they're getting their technique together, also be thinking about what makes music sound good. Think of yourself as the first audience member.
I saw La La Land, the movie, and I think there's a kind of trying to put jazz again into mainstream world. What do you think about?
Yeah, I mean, I know that movie and also another movie called Whiplash, which were made by by the same director.
With the drummer. Yeah.
Right, they both became very popular films. I know that the music community doesn't really, in general, at least my community, the people that I know, are not necessarily fans of those films, but everybody agrees it's nice that jazz is kind of becoming visible again. And I think if you look at people like, you know, Esperanza Spalding and Robert Glasper and Flying Lotus and Kamasi Washington and Gregory Porter, and there are a lot
They're crossing between,
yeah, and they're reaching audience members who previously have never listened to jazz, you know? So they're providing kind of like a gateway into the jazz world, which I think is cool, but I also don't think that that jazz deserves attention if it's not good. Yeah. You know, I think a lot of people think, oh, jazz is important, it must be preserved and respected. Well, it's like, for me, it's like, only if it's good. It's like pizza or pasta is a beautiful thing when it's good, but when it's not good, let's not just keep eating it just because it's there. You know what I mean? It's like, it needs to be good. The cool thing about right now is that there are so many musicians in the jazz world who are making interesting, creative, accessible music that it's proving that it deserves to survive, and I think that's a great thing.
I'd like to see Snarky Puppy crossing between, like a cross between the hip-hop world and the jazz world. Yeah,
I mean, if the hip-hop world wanted to take pieces of our thing, and it's cool, it's interesting. I mean, I love that music, and I love that world, and, you know, the guys in the band all have very diverse musical interests, and many of them are hip-hop heads.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Yeah.
Hi.